The Philadelphia 76ers have just concluded their second consecutive 50-win season. This is not only the most amount of success that this franchise has seen since the early 2000s, but also it is guaranteed that they will have a playoff berth. Unfortunately, their postseason path was concluded in the second round, but in my opinion, the experience is just as valuable as a success, especially when you have an organization who has built their foundation off of the talents of two young players. Now, the recent success that Philly has seen is in direct correlation to their front office moves. After 5 straight years of trusting the process with Sam Hinkie, the Sixers decided to move in a different direction and try to build in a win-now mode. From this, rookie general manager Elton Brand has started to put actions to words, traded away a few pieces, and in return, he brought along both Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. Transactions that many people thought were going to pay off by the end of the season in hopes of a finals appearance, but still extremely risky because both of these players are on expiring contracts, which is why I believe a lot of people view this season as somewhat as a failure. As for me, I don't really view it as a failure, but just another piece to a very important and pivotal offseason. Because when you have a young team, all it takes is one offseason, one signing, and or one trade to make all of the difference. And in one wrong move, the Sixers could go from a Golden State Warriors type dynasty to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And at the center of all of this uncertainty, there's a dynamic with this roster that I believe all of us are aware of, but many of us want to become ignorant to the fact and just hope that everything works itself out. And to me, that's what truly makes Philly so interesting. But before I make that transition, let's first talk about a couple other things that I believe the front office of the Philadelphia 76ers must address first. For starters, let's address Brett Brown. In my opinion, Brett Brown is a really good coach, but he has served his purpose with this young team. He has instilled confidence in some of the younger players and made sure that fundamentally in many aspects they are sound, but to get to the next level, which it seems as if that's what Philly is aiming for, I believe an upgrade at the coaching position is desperately needed. And for me, it became a necessity once Brown's lack of imagination and innovation in his coaching style was consistently being highlighted. Now, as I record this, I am fully aware that he will remain the coach for this team next year, which is completely fine. I am a firm believer in don't fire your coach if you don't have a better option at your disposal. So keeping Brett Brown around isn't the worst thing if it has to be done for one more season. But until then, the one thing that I would love to see Coach Brown work on with this unit is a defensive identity. This year, the Philadelphia 76ers being just an average defensive team, in my opinion, was just completely unacceptable. And I'm thoroughly aware that Joel Embiid and his physical disabilities at times will hurt this team on the defensive side of the floor when he's not on the court. However, having players such as Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris and all of the length and athleticism that they possess, yeah, being average just should not be expected. Now, the next thing that the front office needs to address is choosing between Jimmy Butler or Tobias Harris. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Tobias Harris, but watching this team down the stretch of the regular season and during the playoffs, especially with Brett Brown being more of a simpler offensive-minded coach, it was very obvious that this team was not going to be able to utilize everyone's strengths while also hiding their weaknesses. Also, if you're in the front office of Philly, you have to take into consideration the implications, financially speaking, of what this will do to this team if you give both of those players the amount of money that they are expecting to be paid. So on one hand, you have Jimmy Butler, and to his credit, he was actually way more versatile than I think many people expected, including myself. This level of versatility is desperately needed on a team that is constructed around Ben Simmons and his inability to space out the floor, and also it's great to have just another perimeter defender. But with that being said, even though yes, Jimmy Butler was versatile, there was really nothing that he provided at an elite level outside of defense, which more likely isn't that problematic, but when you have a player who's expecting to get paid either max or somewhere near max, it just doesn't make any sense to pay him that type of money if the only thing he's going to be able to provide at an elite level is defense. And then on the other hand, you had Tobias Harris, who's coming off a career year and really shined in the first part of the season with the Los Angeles Clippers. And when he made the transition to Philly, it seemed as if this was going to be a great fit, but some of his productivity started to dip. Now obviously the dip in productivity should be expected when you put him on a team with more offensive pieces. However, it just seemed as if he was being misutilized, especially during the playoffs when he was just standing in a corner and being a floor spacer at the power forward spot. Granted, this is something that Tobias Harris can do for you, but again, going back to the financial implications, if you're going to give Tobias Harris the amount of money that many people expect him to receive, it wouldn't make any sense for him just to turn into a spot-up shooter down the stretch of a very important postseason game. It's like if someone was single buying a 5-bedroom house. Sure, that one person will be housed, but why spend that much money if you're only going to use 2 bedrooms? However, on the positive side, there was a lot of good things that I saw from Harris this year, and personally, I feel like if they restructure their offense and give Tobias Harris a bigger role offensively, then you could more than likely see more productivity from him, potentially on both sides of the floor. But to wrap all of this up, honestly, keeping both of those players just doesn't make any sense, simply because I don't really think they'll be utilized properly on this team, especially when you take into consideration the inabilities of Ben Simmons. And since we're here, let's just make the transition and get the cat out of the bag, because everyone knows it. Ben Simmons cannot shoot. And even that statement doesn't really and truly depict how bad it is for Ben Simmons and how he just doesn't mesh well with this team whatsoever. Now, granted, there are some other arguments to counter that statement, especially when you take into consideration that Simmons is still relatively young. He has a lot of time to improve, and there are still quite a few players such as Giannis who share his inabilities but still find themselves being very productive. And also, to Simmons' credit, he has still found some very savvy ways to still be productive in a half-court setting when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. Shout out to Thinking Basketball, because he did a fantastic job making a video explaining how Simmons is still productive in a half-court setting, and all of those things are great during the regular season, but when you get into the playoffs and you're dealing with a more competent defensive unit and you have to face that same team over and over again for a 7-game series, yeah, you really start to see why this is so problematic. And in the Raptors series, I saw way too often Simmons just hand the ball over to Jimmy Butler, walk down to the baseline, and was completely inactive for the remainder of the play, which is frightening, because the only way that Simmons is going to improve is if he's more active and involved in the offense, which is why this is so concerning. Yes, you do have players like Giannis who have developed into the player that he is today and still isn't a great shooter, but Giannis became the player that he is now out of necessity. The Bucks needed a ball handler and scorer, so Giannis picked up different roles. But when you put Simmons on a team with Jimmy Butler, Embiid, and Harris, he doesn't really have to be a ball handler, which does take him out of his element of being a playmaker, which are the two greatest aspects to his game. And then when he doesn't have the ball in his hand in a half-court setting, understandably so, he just isn't connected in the offense. But here's where the problem becomes a bit more significant. The reason why Simmons just hangs around the baseline is because literally all he can do is finish around the rim. I know that sounds like a hyperbolic statement, but just look at this shot chart here. As you clearly can see, there is very little to no activity outside of the paint, especially from the 3-point line, and all of these shot attempts are practically taken underneath the rim. This kind of shot chart not only displays a lack of diversity in someone's shot selection, but also leaves their team at a massive disadvantage, because offensively there's only so many ways that you can utilize this type of a player. Crazy enough though, this isn't even Ben Simmons. This is Steven Adams' shot chart. So to just put into comparison how bad Ben Simmons really is, this is his shot chart. As you can clearly see, some very similar patterns, a lot of shots attempted in the paint, very few attempted outside of the lane, especially not from behind the arc. But when it comes to Simmons, if he is not literally underneath the basket, we're talking about in the restricted area, he is vastly inefficient. To put numbers to the shot chart, Simmons in the restricted area is shooting roughly around 70% from the field. Everywhere else in the lane, excluding the restricted area, Simmons is converting below 40%. Just let that settle in and imagine how that translates on the floor. Not only are we talking about a very predictable scorer in Simmons, but it affects everyone else's placement on the floor. Tobias Harris just stands around in the corner spacing out the floor because someone else outside of JJ Redick has to do so. Jimmy Butler must have the ball in his hand because if Simmons tries to initiate a pick and roll, then the opposing team is just going to sag off of him and go under the screen. And Joel Embiid's placement varies from play to play, but more than likely he's not going to be close to the basket either because it's just going to make it more difficult for both him and Simmons to score, thus all of us witnessing Embiid chucking up three-pointers that he doesn't need to attempt. Now again, I want to be clear, I'm not losing all faith in Simmons, but it's going to take some time for him to grow into the player that this team needs him to become, and that's okay. He's young and that should be expected. The problem with this though is that I don't believe that they have that much time. I theorize the reason why the Sixers rushed into this win now mode has a lot to do with their fear in Embiid and his health. If the front office believes that Embiid only has a handful of years of greatness at his disposal due to his injury history, then it would make sense to why they're trying to capitalize on the talent that he's displaying right now, because even at a very young age, Embiid is a highly impressive player, and consequently, this decision potentially could hurt the progress of Ben Simmons. So what should Philly do? So yeah, Philly is in a very, very interesting situation, and I just wonder what's going to happen in the next upcoming months to potentially the following years as well. Please let me know what you think about this team in the comment section below. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, notification bell, and I will see you all next time. Peace.